So we're back with lesson 3. We've set up our first model, which we're probably going to delete next week, and a controller, which we're also going to delete and regenerate next week. And we've looked at this bizarre var construct here that allows us to create a typed list. So what we'll do is we'll just use a simple loop to create a list of 10 albums. So I'll just create a simple for loop starting at 1 and at 10. Inside of this loop, every time we go around, I want to create a new album and then add it to the list that we instantiated on line 16. We can actually do this in a single line of code. Because albums is declared as a list, it has all of the methods it inherits from the list class. So it has add, remove, find, join, order, select, all these methods that any .NET list will have, many of which we're going to use later on when we start running queries against the database. We're going to call the add method, and in here, create a new album. Because we have access to our album model, and our title property has a set method, we'll just say title equals album. It is because I want it to be album space 1, album space 2. So we're kind of programmatically doing what we did with the products, but we just hard-coded the HTML, right? On our view, we hard-coded product 1, 2, 3. So we're creating it in the controller instead. So if our album model had other properties, well, we could fill them here too. We don't have any other properties right now. Eventually we will. An album will have things like it'll have an artist, it'll have a cover, it'll have a price. For today, all we need is a name. Good enough. So if we want to use the view bag, once our loop's done running, our album list now has 10 items, we can just stick this album object in the view bag. In the view bag, it's completely unstructured, so we're not bound to use Pascal case if we don't want to. View bag, any properties, we just define them and use them. There's no structure with view bag at all. So we should build our solution. Our code here is done. We're going to modify it in a bit, but we'll try it out like this. So we need to build. Did we talk about this last week? I can't remember which section. Somebody asked about build versus rebuild. It was the section, okay, because I addressed this Monday and nobody had any idea what I was talking about. I said, I know someone asked me about build versus rebuild, and I didn't have a good answer for you, but I would find the answer. I remembered to do this. Here's the answer. When you build, it recompiles and it updates the current DLL. At least it tries to. And if the build is successful, it'll overwrite the existing DLL. What rebuild will do is first delete any DLLs and then generate new ones. Clean basically just deletes the old DLL. So in effect, rebuild is like doing a clean and then a build in one operation. They may be wondering, well, why do we ever need rebuild or clean? Like, why don't we just use build? Occasionally, the Visual Studio compiler kind of dies on us, and we get bizarre compilation errors. Even though there's no code errors, it happens. It'll probably happen to every one of you at some point in semester. you know your code is fine, or even you go to compile something, you haven't even made changes and it just locks up. In that case, your first step is try and rebuild the solution. Sometimes the old DLL just maybe gets locked and Visual Studio gets an error trying to overwrite it. So you can try the rebuild, which will delete those old DLLs and then compile. So if you have a compile error when you're pretty confident your code is correct, rebuild is usually step 1. Step 2 is occasionally you have to restart Visual Studio. Doesn't happen often. Chances are it's going to happen to somebody, like as in like all of you. Okay. Yeah. So that's kind of that's like your first line of defense against the compilation error is try rebuild if build doesn't work. Okay. So I've built here. I think I did build. I guess I hadn't done it. I was talking about it, but I hadn't done it. So now if we try localhost / albums, I can type it in lowercase. The URLs, remember I'm on Windows, URLs are not case sensitive. So it tries to load albums index, but we haven't created this view yet. So this is kind of the expected result. So our next step is we need to make this particular view. Views, albums, index.cshtml. So when we created the controller called albums, we get a subfolder called albums in views, but it's empty. So we want to go down to views, albums, and add a view. What name do we need to give it? We want to call it index, and then it matches the method or action name in our controller. We'll leave this. We'll come back to this a bit later. So all you need to do is change the view name to index. If your layout page is not checked off, just browse and pick the views shared layout. So we get our header, footer, and CSS. Otherwise, we get just a blank web page with no template. So just call it index, use our layout, and add. I'll just change the title and the H2 tag. If we go back to the browser now and refresh, our error should go away and we should get a page that has our nav bar and a heading that says albums. No data yet, but our error screen should go away. We don't need to build because we're just adding a view. I'm modifying anything on the server end.
Is it always index?
Yes. It will always be indexed. That's the default. That was actually one of the questions on the quiz, right? What's the default method?
We are naming it, right?
It can be, but if you name it something else, it's not the default. So notice if I do /index built to do the same thing, right? So you don't have to have a method called index, but then you don't get this nice friendly URL, which is in effect the home page for the album section of the site. So you don't have to follow that convention, but kind of our apps are designed to run that way. You want to override it? Yes, you have the freedom to override it. You can fiddle with this entire URL pattern if you decide, I don't like the way .NET MVC runs its URLs. I want my own structure. You can override it in here. Under app start, under root config, this sets up the default, right? So it's our controller /action/ID, and the default is index. So if you want to call your default method something other than index, change it in there and use something else. Like you want to call it default instead of index, you change that to default and make sure you have a default method in your controller. That'll work fine. So typically we tend to stay with those rules, but you have the flexibility to change them, right? Or it may be that you're happy working with them, but somebody who makes the decision says, no, I don't like it, or your client says I need my URLs to look this way for whatever reason, well, you can override the pattern. We'll probably stick with it, but that's where you do it inside of root config. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we want to take that data and display it here. So our syntax for doing a loop is a little bit cleaner in a MVC view than it was with PHP. So we'll just start with a server-side symbol. We can do the for each. Here's our favorite word again. Our. So this albums property of the view bag, it's untyped, it's unstructured, but whatever we stock it in the controller, we're hoping is in here in the view. Actually, maybe we'll just put on a simple list tag, an ordered list, so we can create a bulleted list. I like how Visual Studio reformats my code, it indents automatically for me. But in here, we just need an LI. I did. We're recording. Yep. So how would we display those 10 album titles here? What goes inside of this LI tag? It's a server-side value, so what's the first thing we need? Yeah, we need that symbol. A, which represents the current iteration of the loop. Dot. Try it. We created a list of albums. Each album has a title property in our controller. We pass that to the view bag, and now we're trying to read those items out of the view bag. So try that, see what you get in your browser. We may have to modify it a bit. I'm fairly optimistic it should work. Which it does. Probably not the way we're really going to pass lists of data. There's some disadvantages to using the view bag for this, even though it's functional. Can anybody think of any problems with doing it this way? Works. Okay. Well, in this case, I guess they actually are alphabetical. That we could actually change here, right? So I could say expression. That would sort it. We can actually control that, and we will do this in our controllers, because by default, the controller code is just going to select the data in sequential order by ID, so we can easily order that way. What's wrong with this? Not wrong, but it's somewhat limited. I'll give you one hint. Just take this out for a second. So one is when we use ViewBag, remember ViewBag is totally unstructured. So our code editor is not helping us out here. When I try to refer to that album object, it's just kind of like this hidden amorphous thing. Could be one value, could be a million values. We have no idea what's really in there. So if I do title like this, Visual Studio says, okay, that's cool. What's going to happen when I reload the page like this? Except we don't find this out until somebody tells us our page crashed. So when ViewBag is unstructured, it means if we're not following our data structure properly, we're going to find out at runtime, which is not ideal. So generally using the ViewBag to pass this data is probably not our best option. It'll work, but there's a better way of doing it. I'm just going to comment this section out. And I'm going to comment out that line in the controller where we put the list in the view bag. There's a better way of doing this. I'll maybe put a comment here. So in your controller, go back to your controller and comment out the line where we put the product in the view bag. We're not going to use the view bag. We're going to do this instead. We want to hand the list of albums that are typed as albums directly to the view. And then we're going to have to put a declaration on our view at the top that says this view is accepting or expecting to get a list of type album passed to it whenever it loads. So our return view, it has 8 overloads. We've used 2 of them. Most of the time we use the first overload, which is parameterless. Just return a view with the same name. That's what we've been doing almost all the time. Once in the first week, we used this version where we called a view that had a different name than our method or our action. Right? I think we had a method called about, and we called a view called about us. We renamed the view, so we had to specify. Okay, we did that here. So that's the second version. This time, we're using the third overload. We're not passing in a string, we're passing in some kind of object. It could be a list, it could be a single object. In this case, we're going to pass in a list. So return the view, but hand it our list that's of type album, that's based on a model. So the controller is going to call the view and also say, by the way, here's a bunch of data of this type. So we'll build here. So we need to write a little bit of code on each end in order to make this connection work. So in the controller end of things, we actually pass that data in our return statement. And this could be complex types. So maybe we've got a query that involves a whole bunch of different tables. We can write the query here, store the results in a list of type var, and pass that query data in our return statement. So on the view, we need to do something else. Up at the top, we need to declare what kind of data is coming into the view. So we'll use this, and there's kind of a weird syntax gotcha here. We're going to declare a model. The weird things. The first one is we have to reference our project name models dot now this will work. This is correct syntactically, but if we declare our model this way, then the view is expecting one object, a single instance of an album object, which is not what we're passing. What are we passing instead? Yeah, we're passing a list of albums. So it's not enough to say the data type coming in is an album. We also need to say that it's a list. So we're going to use an interface for this. So we're going to wrap this, declaring this object as Ienumerable. So this is part of the .NET framework. It allows us, so it's kind of a generic collection that we can iterate through. So we're not just getting a single album object in, we're getting a strongly typed list of album objects that we can iterate from. So we'll use both of those versions later on. Our index views are always going to have an Ienumerable of some, we may have a customer's index view that shows all our customers. So the model is going to be an Ienumerable of type customer. But then we're also going to have a customer details view and a customer edit view. There, the model will be a single customer object because we're only looking up one record at a time. So we'll use both of those, but typically the index views will support Ienumerable because we want to pass a list to be displayed. So that's the first weird gotcha, is this Ienumerable with the angled brackets around our data type. Then we'll create a UL. We're going to write a similar for each loop. Now, in this case, we're not referencing the view bag. We're actually referencing the model. If anybody can come up for an explanation of what I'm about to show you, I'm all ears because it makes no sense to me. We've declared our model. It actually has to be all lowercase. If I declare it as capital M here, we'll see if that works. Model. And we'll see if this works. Yeah. For some reason, our declaration up here has to be lowercase, and yet this one has to be first letters in uppercase. Don't ask me why, because I have no clue. Some bizarre Microsoft Razor syntax thing that has never made any sense to me. So notice the difference between when we use a model and when we use the view bag. How is this different when I type a dot when we're passing in a model? Ali? Right, IntelliSense that shows me the properties, methods of an album object are here, which will reduce the coding and reduce the chance I'm going to refer to a property that doesn't exist. In the view bag, when I referred to title in lowercase, right, the Visual Studio didn't complain. I only got an error when I tried to load the browser with the property name all lowercase. Here I get the IntelliSense. We're gonna get the same result. But here, if I go and make the same mistake of writing it all lowercase, Visual Studio tells me right away, hey, you've referenced that property name wrong, that property name doesn't exist. So I'm gonna catch that error before I go ahead and publish this and somebody or 1 million people get a page that doesn't load. So generally, this is why we're better off using a model and passing in strongly typed data than using the view bag. We get the code hinting, and it will also help us debug if we don't reference that object properly in some way. Preferable. Okay. Yep. Okay. What you may need to do, it may be a case of try to build first. Try building first and see if you still get it.
Use like small d, it's not showing any error.
It's not showing any error?
Yeah.
Does it load correctly?
No, like when I put it,
Yeah.
like, then it shows the error the same way as it was doing with the view bag. it's not a data.
Excuse me. Have you built your solution? You did build? Because if you haven't built, it's still got data in the view bag.
I just read it, but there's one question. Top M for the model, is it small or capital?
Here, it's small. Yet here, that's the question I have no answer to. I don't know. Okay. Well, yeah, that's, I mean, I know that I understand that it references that. I just don't understand why they're written in separate cases and why it has to be that you declare it in lowercase, yet when you reference it, you use the capital. That's, yeah, I don't understand. I understand what it does. I don't understand the syntax, the logic behind the syntax. And if you try to change the syntax, it breaks. You have to follow it this way or it doesn't work. You still having your issue? Okay, so what was the problem? Right. Yeah, it has to be lowercase or that data is empty. It's bizarre. I don't understand why they've used that construct differently. And the last thing we could do, let's say we wanted to make these links, just like in our store, which we will do because next week when we start displaying albums from the database, we'll want to display information about an album, maybe the cover and the title, and then have a user be able to click it so they could see the details, put it in their shopping cart. So if we want, in here, in front of a.title, we can use action link. These links aren't going to go anywhere. Now each item is going to be clickable. It'll just reload the same page. But next week it's going to go and load the details page instead. So that'll turn those into hyperlinks. So it just takes us back to the same place, but they're clickable. So we're wrapping a server-side value, we're using that as a parameter of a server-side method. So we just need the one @ symbol at the beginning. Allie?
My understanding, so you have in quotations the index that could easily just as well be.
Well, this is this version of the action link. Yeah. Two parameters: the text on the link and the name of the action it's calling. So probably next week when we click an album, rather than loading index, right now that's the only thing we have, it will probably load a details view, right? We show them a list. When they click details, we want to see all of the fields about that particular album. You know, how much does it cost? And also will include like an add to cart button eventually as well. So for now, we're just loading the one page we have, but that'll be a details method next week. So the version we have from lines 10 to 16, it works. It's just not recommended, and you probably won't see that for a list of data. We're going to see the model being used, where the data's fetched in the controller and passed directly as a property in our return view statement. That's typically how the controllers and views will handle displaying data. So most of our views are going to have a model. Our index views will typically be Ienumerable. All the other views are generally going to be a single model. So when we're creating, editing, viewing, or deleting, we're only working with one object at a time. So we won't have the Ienumerable here. We'll just have a single model name. So next week, we're actually going to get rid of these files. We'll blow them away, but they'll be in the lesson 3 commit on GitHub, so you can always refer back to them. In fact, Visual Studio is going to auto-generate most of this stuff. So for example, I'll show you what this will look like. If I make another view, I won't probably keep this, but I said I would show you this. If I add a view, so I'll just call it albums. You don't have to do this. When we created this one, right, we said empty without a model. In this one, if I actually pick a list template and say it's based on the album class, on the album model, notice what we get. We get the declaration automatically written for us on line 1, which means we're not going to mess it up because Visual Studio wrote it. It's good. It creates the heading. It gives us a link to the add a new one, and then it builds an HTML table. Here's our for each loop. It will loop through all the albums and display them with edit details and delete links. So maybe we don't want to allow people to delete stuff. Well, that's fine. We could just go here and get rid of that. So that would be a starting point of how we would create a view. We'll let Visual Studio kind of generate the template, and it'll give us the right model. So there's templates for creating, editing, viewing, deleting lists. So we're actually not going to write a whole lot of code. We're never going to build our own views. We're going to use the Visual Studio scaffolding to generate them. And then we just change the views as necessary, right? We want to hide some columns. We want to rename some of the headings. Maybe we want to add some more Bootstrap classes so our table gets alternating colors. We want to make it so we can add jQuery to do column sorting by clicking the headers and footers. That's the kind of stuff we're going to have to add in. But we can start with these view templates. So I'm not going to really keep that view. We're not going to use it, but that's where we'll be going. Okay. So what else do we want to do? We got time. Good. Okay. I'm going to commit this up to GitHub. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at how do we deploy this stuff to Azure. So most of you, a lot of you have used Azure before, right? A lot of you used it for your PHP class. Some of you used AWS, probably some of you used Azure, right? So traditionally you would have done this, right? You've got your machine, you've got IIS running on Azure, and you've used FTP to transfer your files. This works, and you can continue to do that with your .NET applications. I don't recommend it. There's a number of reasons why. We're going to use a different process. So we're going to use, and most cloud services have this. Azure isn't the only one, but Azure supports continuous deployment from source control. So what we're going to do is we're going to push our code to GitHub. We're going to log into the Azure panel and create a new website. But rather than using FTP to upload our files, we're going to connect that particular website to our GitHub repository. And what Azure does is every 60 seconds, it will check for a new commit. And as soon as we make a new commit to GitHub, Azure will go and grab that new version. So we no longer have to upload our files or use FileZilla at all to deploy. All you have to do is back your code up to GitHub. Boom, 60 seconds later, that change is going to be live on Azure. And there's a number of other benefits to doing this, which we'll see once we get this set up. So the first thing to do is get your current version and let's push it up to GitHub. So you can use the command line, you can use any of the 4 methods you want to upload it. I'll just use Team Explorer in Visual Studio. So I just click my Team Explorer window and click Home and Changes. It'll show me all the files I loaded today. So I'm just going to put in a commit message and do a commit and push. This will sync my current version of the project up to my GitHub repository online. Commit and push. It should be pretty quick because I only changed a few files. So I've successfully pushed. I'll just go and double check on GitHub, make sure that my latest commit is dated today and it says lesson 3. So here we go, updated 21 seconds ago. So here are my changes. Cool. So now I want to make a new application on Azure and then connect that application to this Git repository. And once we do that, I'm going to make a couple other changes to my project and push those again, and we'll see that my website should get updated automatically without me having to use FileZilla at all. So I'm going to log into the Azure portal. Anyone doesn't have Azure, your fire, we'll come back to you in a minute. Actually, I think I will show you first. So, get portal, it's portal.azure.com. If you need it, here's how to get it. Just search for Azure Imagine. You search for that, take you right here. Microsoft Azure for Students. You go here. You click, it gives you the Microsoft Azure for Students starter offer, click activate. Just search for Azure Imagine. And it'll be guaranteed the first item in your search results. So you should get this page if you don't have it set up. Pick this one here, Azure for Students Starter. This one requires you to give them a credit card. You do not need to give them a credit card. Don't pick this option. Pick Activate Azure for Students Starter if you don't already have an account. If you've used Azure before, you should just be able to log into the portal. If you can get into the dashboard, you should be good. Okay, the way to check, if you can get in, go down to this cost management and billing. And under subscriptions, so I've got the Azure for Students and it says it's active, no cost. Okay, if it's disabled, then what you need to do is contact them through here. So go to the help link. And you just have to basically open a support ticket. So use your student email address in the ticket. Say you're a Georgian College Computer Studies student. Your Imagine subscription has expired. Can they please renew your subscription? Mike?
I did that yesterday.
Yep.
I said I didn't have a subscription. I just searched up Azure for Students, put in my Georgian College email. Like that, I had it. Nothing. No email.
Okay, so you can try, yeah, you should be able to do that through this link. So you can try it through here. If you don't have your account set up today, don't panic. I am recording the process. So once you have your account set up and you can let me know if you're having trouble, you can deploy. Does anybody have an active subscription? Some of you do. Okay. Well, I will show those of you who have an active subscription how we deploy. Everyone else, I'm recording this. Okay. So all we do is go to create a resource on the left. and choose web app. Give it a name. It'll be a subdomain under azurewebsites.net. So I'll call mine MVC Music Store. Has to be a unique name. You can create a new resource group or use an existing one. It doesn't matter. That's only really affecting kind of billing, which we're not doing. So just give it a unique name. It should say that your subscription is Microsoft Imagine. And then just click create. So this will take a minute and it will create a new empty web application. So it jumps you back to the dashboard and gives you this little deployment progress window, which should take a minute or two to run. So create a resource and choose web app. Give it a name. So once it's done, if you click the notifications, you get these two options. Pin to dashboard, that'll just put an icon for it on your home screen. So I'm going to do that. And then if you click go to resource, it'll open up the website administration tool. So here's my site. You get full access to manage your own site. Here's the URL. Whatever you named it, .azurewebsites.net. And it does run under HTTPS. There's a wildcard SSL certificate. We'll talk about SSL later in the term. So you just click it and it gives you this kind of start page. So there's one HTML file here by default. So it tells me we're up and running. So again, I just went to create, picked web application, gave it a name, gave it a minute to run, and we get this blank site. So if I want to use FTP, I can just go into deployment credentials here, and it allows me to set up a username and password, which you could then use in FileZilla if you want. We're going to use this instead. So if you go to deployment options, it says choose your source. So here are all the places we can set up continuous deployment. Obviously, we're going to use GitHub. Now, I've already authenticated through my GitHub account in Azure. You probably, so it already shows my GitHub username here. If you click authorization, it will then bring up a GitHub login window asking you to authenticate with GitHub. You're basically you're granting Azure permission to authenticate through GitHub, which is all Microsoft now anyway, since Microsoft bought GitHub in the spring. So you're not giving away any big secrets to let Microsoft have your GitHub login. So click authorization, and then you just put in your GitHub username and password. Once that's done, it'll ask you to choose your project. So this will bring up all your repositories. In chronological order, the most recently updated repository will be at the top. So I'll pick my Friday Music Store. You can also deploy, you can pick your branch. Well, for what we're doing, we only have one branch, which is master, but this is really helpful if we have, say, a staging branch, development branch, testing branch, etc. We can pick a production branch. So we can work on other code and not worry about pushing that to Azure while we're still working or testing it. So pick master and click OK. So Azure is now authenticating through GitHub, and it's going to grab my repository. And it's going to try and pull a copy of the code from GitHub over to IIS. So it says it's set it up, which is good. If I go back here now to deployment options, we can see what's happening. It's actually compiling a version on the server. And you can see it's got my latest commit. It's trying to pull in the version I just pushed. So it's going to take a minute or two. So it has to pull all of the packages. Actually, someone asked that question this morning. What happens with those packages? Because remember, they're not in my GitHub repository, yet I'm using them. So where do they come from? Because my site has all those dependencies, yet those dependencies aren't in the repository that's being pulled. So how does this work? It does know how to get them. You're right, Stephen. Okay, so it says my deployment is active. So here's what it does. It uses this file. So when we deploy, IIS reads my packages.config. Most of these are already Microsoft packages, so they're already installed on the server. So it doesn't have to go and grab them all. It will just go through packages.config, and if I've added any third-party packages that aren't on the server, that deployment will automatically check and go and add those libraries in. It'll download them from NuGet if I put something in my site that isn't already on the server. It's automatic. It's very handy. And here's our site. So everything we've done today is now online.
Is this just for ASP.NET projects, or this could be?
It could be anything. So next summer, when you guys do Node.js, you can run Node.js here. Same thing, deploy to GitHub. And most cloud services will work the same. They'll give you the same option. So here's our albums, but now it's running online. So it's pulled my initial commit, my lesson 3, my current commit. I want to show you now that we've deployed it, how the continuous deployment, how this part works. So here's what I'm going to do. Typically in the README files, it's a good idea to include a link to the live site. So I'm going to encourage you in your assignments, please create a README file. You know, if you create a lab, create a README that describes the lab and put a link to it so I can click and then I can load the site on Azure. So I'm just going to modify my README. Actually, sorry, we'll do that. Let's modify the homepage. I'm going to make a change to the homepage. We'll take this and we'll just replace the content and I'll make a new commit. And then we'll see how the continuous deployment will automatically pull that new version. So I'm going to open up my README file because it already has a good description of our site. So I'm going to take this description we wrote last week, the week before. I want to copy that into the site homepage and overwrite that little paragraph about ASP.NET. That's in the Microsoft kind of boilerplate template we got. So I'll copy that. We'll take a break shortly. This will be the last thing we do before we have a break. So I'll go to home index and I'll delete. I'll put my class back in, I guess. So now my site homepage describes what this application is rather than some generic statement from Microsoft about ASP.NET. So if I refresh my local version, I just go to home. You can make any change you want. You don't have to copy and paste that line. Right? I've just now taken what was in the README file and I've put that on my homepage. And maybe I'll change this heading. Instead of ASP.NET, I'll change my H1 tag to say, so on my local server, it looks like this now. My version on Azure, it doesn't have this change. I'm still in my local server. If I refresh Azure, it still says ASP.NET blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to make a new commit, and then we'll see how the continuous deployment works once I put changes in the master branch. So I'll go to Team Explorer and changes. Home page content. So I'll just do a push. Which should be really quick because I'm just uploading a single file here. Now I'll go back to the portal. Now, if I don't want to wait for it, I can click the sync button, but there, I waited, what, 10 seconds? It found a new commit. It shows us the new commit message. This version's still online. While it's building, I'm not sure if I can access it while it's building. May not. I think the old version should still be online. We'll see. There. So it's already updated. And now it shows us this. It shows us which commit is active. So this is a really good reason for naming your commits descriptively. So we can see which version is active and what we changed. But one of the other great features is, let's say once we look at our new version, we realize we messed something up. All I need to do is click this and it will revert to the previous version or redeploy my older version, right? With FTP, you don't have that ability. You overwrite those files with FTP, those old files are gone. And if you broke something, you need to scramble to go and find and fix. It also means with FTP, right, we have to upload every folder or every file we changed. Maybe we changed 50 files, we upload 49, we forget one file, and the application breaks. With this method, it does a batch upload, right? So all the changes get automatically included. We don't have to worry that we updated certain files and forgot to update other files. So this is a way, way better way to deploy. If we need to disconnect, we want to use a different repository, just click disconnect, and then it's no longer linked to that Git repository. So we're going to use this deployment method. We're going to use this deployment method all the time in class. Much easier. And most cloud services will allow you to do this. That's kind of the idea. So FTP will fade away as more and more of our infrastructures run this way. Our code is archived and backed up on GitHub. We can collaborate if we're working in a team, and we can just deploy really easily with continuous deployment. You don't have to use GitHub if you like. Every section there's always one or two students who prefer to use Bitbucket. You can use Bitbucket, fine. It will work the exact same way. You want to deploy from something else. Anybody have any questions about the process?
Related, in the date change the type of project it is. Like, so this is currently an ASP.NET.
You don't have to specify. They don't care. Azure treats every web project as the same type. So you can run Node, ASP.NET, or PHP just with that web app template. It supports all of them. No problem. So if I wanted to disconnect here and then connect this up to a repository that had a PHP Laravel site, no problem. That's fine. I could use the same URL and do it. It's flexible. But the database still has to. Yeah, so we haven't configured the database yet. We're going to start to do that after. Okay. It's 5:02. Let's take 10 minutes here. We come back, we're just going to do one more quick thing in our README file, and then we're going to start getting our database set up. That's going to be the last thing we do. Okay? We'll come back in 10 minutes. I got to step out for a minute.